Hello and welcome to Vice Rhino's channel. Sorry, that's not my opening. What's up, heathens? How y'all doing? I'm the Godless Engineer, and I critically analyze apologist claims to give you the best arguments and information so that you can stand up and use your voice. Today, we're going to be trying to sift through what Jordan Peterson is actually trying to say when he answers this question.
What do you think the best argument for atheism is?
I don't know if he was shitting himself or if he was having a migraine or what was going on there, but apparently he's thinking really hard about this question. I'm wondering, what do you think about the question? Do you think that there is a solid argument for atheism? Atheism is just not believing in a God, so it's not making a positive claim for anything. We're just simply saying, hey, I don't believe. You have evidence? Show me some evidence. If you can prove that that evidence proves your particular claim, then more than likely, I'll start believing it. Religious apologists have yet to give us sufficient evidence in order to prove that a God exists and that we should worship him. But Jordan Peterson, in all of his Kermity kind of way, is going to be explaining to us what the best argument for atheism is, or rather, why atheism can't actually make an argument. So if you want to around and find out why Jordan Peterson thinks atheism just simply cannot be true, then please stay tuned. First off, before we get into the video, I do want to thank Vice Rhino for allowing me to review this interview between Matt Fradd from Pines with Aquinas and Jordan Peterson on his channel this week. I do have a video, the first half of this interview, over on my channel. So if you would like to, you can go over there and you can check out this first section of it, which deals more with some philosophical word garbage, where Jordan Peterson attempts to say that I believe in magic and I disagree with atheists when they say they don't believe in magic. So if you want to, go over there right now, check it out. If you want to see the first portion of this. And while you're over there, make sure you subscribe. I mean, I'm not that bad of a guy. Come on, guys, smash that subscribe button. Seriously, let's go on ahead and get into the video.
I don't think there is a good argument for atheism. I think it's based on a fundamental misunderstanding about the nature of the world.
Okay, very interesting there. If you would like to see how Matt interacts with that, and also it's pretty hilarious to watch Matt Fradd's reactions because he's thoroughly confused by Jordan Peterson and everything that he says. That is going to be over there on my channel, so definitely go and check that out. He does not have any kind of good answers like surrounding like atheism, but essentially he disregards materialistic determinism and he thinks that there's something more to this world, which essentially equates to magic. So with all of that in mind, he continues on this word garbagey rant, just simply about how magic exists. And he uses a bunch of fanciful words, but I try to explain it in simple terms that most people would use and understand. But now we're going to be getting into a section of the video where Matt is going to be, I guess, slightly challenging Jordan Peterson a little bit on some of these things. They get into some topics about evolution and some very specific scientific claims, which I thought Vice Rhino's audience would appreciate.
It's not so far. No, I think the evolutionary biology and the religious will dovetail perfectly.
Well, okay, but
yeah, I mentioned this on the other video too, but I don't see how science and religion can dovetail, because throughout the history of Christianity, which is the religion that they're talking about, when they're speaking ambiguously about religion, they're talking about Yahweh, they're talking about the Bible, they're talking about Christianity, right? Christianity has been proven several times to deviate from reality. And what have we used in order to show that it deviates from reality? Well, we use science. So can science ever dovetail with religion? No. Science will never come together with religion because they're both based fundamentally on separate tracks. Science over here is looking to describe reality as it exists. It's trying to describe our natural world so that we can better interact with it. We can better understand it. While religion is over here thinking that magic exists, and magic is a primary component of religion. And if you don't accept that magic does exist and that things in this world can't just magically change on a whim or through magical incantations, then you're a heretic. Religion is not looking to describe our reality as it exists. Religion is looking to control people using various methods of control. Guilt and shame, as you know, they are on a Catholic podcast here. Guilt and shame are one of the biggest things that religions use in order to control people. Science doesn't have guilt or shame or anything like that. It's not seeking to control anybody or anything. It's just a tool that we use in order to understand our world. And religion does the exact opposite. It doesn't want to understand our world. Like people that advance religion or religion as practiced by people in general, they are not looking to describe reality. They are looking to maybe not necessarily fabricate things about reality, but they are believing in things that are not in reality. And that's one of the primary selling points of a religion. The fact that they know these secret things that exist in reality, but don't have evidence for. And we do have the evidence, and that evidence is my speculative assertion that my God exists. And he had to kill his own son in order to absolve the sin that he gave you in the first place.
And here's the thing.
God is the deepest instinct.
If I now know that...
I don't know what that means whatsoever. What does it mean for God to be the deepest instinct? I feel like that would result in every single person having their own individual ideas about God and therefore their own individual gods that are different from one another. Whereas in Christianity, it talks about God being personal, but it's the same God that's personal to everybody. You know, figure that the fuck out. That would entail everybody has the same instinct, but we know that not everybody does have the same instinct. People obviously have different instincts about them. So what's the deepest instinct? My guess is that he would probably obfuscate this idea of instincts down into something that could be literally anything or be so malleable that it can be anything, therefore rendering everything that he's saying pointless.
It's evolution that's wired me thus. I can choose to disobey it. It's lower than me. I could be Raskolnikov, presumably. I could go against it.
Of course.
And another source would be individuals. Like you could tell me I'm a bad person to do X, Y, or Z, or praise me if I do other things, and I might feel good or feel bad. Or collectively as society, you can say this.
Yeah.
But just as you have no right, it seems to me, to determine how I ought to live, collectively, why would you have any more authority?
That's Raskolnikov's argument too.
So it's
right. Which is no different than what Christians do. Christians do the exact same thing. They choose to change their particular definition of God, what God endorses and everything like that all the time. So it seems like the moral foundation, or at least the worldview of Christianity, is just as malleable as the worldviews of atheists or anybody else out there. They can elect to do and not do things. They regularly love bomb people or they shame people for doing different actions. Like everything that Matt Fradd said, if you want to rewind, go back and re-listen to him with this in mind, please do. But what Matt Fradd said has no bearing on distinguishing between atheists and Christians, because both groups do those exact things.
Okay, so
or the Marquis de Sade.
So this objective morality could come from beneath us in evolution, from outside of us on our level.
Yeah.
Maybe it comes from above us. And then it's like, okay, if it comes from above us, is it in some sort of Platonic form? And if it is a Platonic form, is there a commandment being issued? And why do I need to be obedient to a Platonic form? So
he's talking about Platonic forms. Now, a little bit of a rabbit hole here. At first, I thought he said Plutonic forms or Platonic forms. Like a Platonic relationship is what I was thinking about. But, you know, the only thing I come up with is geology. Yeah, it was geology, like sites and geology papers and everything like that. Educational websites. So that's obviously not what he was talking about. But what he's talking about is Platonic forms, Plato's theory of forms. At least this is the best that I can, I guess, interpret from what they're talking about here. They're talking about Plato's theory of forms. And Plato had this idea that these forms, which were basically perfect representations of everyday things that we know of in reality, these everyday things are not perfect forms. They are corrupted a little bit, which kind of is similar to what's preached in Hebrews. Hebrews teaches about how there are perfect forms in heaven of everything that exists on earth, and everything that exists on earth are corrupted or non-perfect, degraded forms of things that exist in heaven. In this Platonic theory of forms, Plato actually considered these forms, these ideas in your head, to be more real than the actual objects that exist in reality, which kind of seems crazy to me. I don't exactly understand it all, but what Matt Fradd is talking about here is like whether or not God is a Platonic form, and therefore just the idea of God existing is that idea issuing commands and all this other stuff. So that's what he's talking about here. I'm not exactly sure how this factors in, other than I have heard the argument from Christians that say that just the mere idea of God existing means that he exists, which I think stems from this whole Platonic forms sort of argument that Matt Fradd is making here. I don't think that ideas existing in your head necessarily exist in reality. In fact, the whole idea behind the Platonic forms is that they don't actually exist in reality. They can only abstractly exist, like ever, because things that exist in reality can't be perfect. Therefore, these are things that will never exist in reality. The things that exist in reality are just mere like poor copies of the things. They're just a little bit off balance from the perfect. But again, I don't know how all of this factors into the original question of this entire video of, what's a good argument for atheism, or why is atheism fundamentally wrong? That's the other question that's being asked as well. So
you don't end up in hell. That's why.
Right. So I could, yeah.
No, but seriously, that's why.
I see.
It's like,
this is sort of like
violate the moral order and watch what happens. Go right ahead.
Okay. So he's saying that by violating the moral order, you're going to get sent to hell. What is the moral order? Well, for them, Christians, that is, it would be anything that displeases God. That's violating the moral order. It's immoral to do certain things. I mean, God wouldn't consider it immoral to place women into sexual slavery because he did it all the time in the Old Testament. So I feel like the moral foundations that are being discussed here, like my moral foundation versus theirs, is a bit off kilter. Also, their moral foundations are a bit off kilter from what God's original moral foundation was in the Old Testament and even in the New Testament, because even the sexual slavery of women didn't just go away with Jesus. That was still around.
I'm with you. This is the sort of Aristotelian Nicomachean ethics idea, right? Where like eudaimonia is just flourishing. And so it's like there is a way to act.
You put yourself in alignment with...
Okay, so what Matt Fradd just explained right there was the idea of human flourishing being the goal of, I guess, a more secular moral foundation. Like whatever causes humans to flourish or focuses on humans flourishing, that would be considered a good thing. And then anything that would prevent human flourishing would be considered a bad thing. And then it becomes a subjective thing about, how do you best achieve human flourishing? And like everybody has different opinions on it. It's all very subjective. But I would contend that Christians are also very subjective. Christians regularly pick and choose which parts of God's personality they like and which commandments they like to enforce on other people or that they like to enforce on themselves. In reality, none of this is actually doing any kind of work to differentiate Christians from atheists at this point. It all just seems like we're assholes with opinions, which is accurate.
The cosmic order.
Yeah, but I could choose not. Yeah, I could choose not to do that.
Sure,
which you can choose to go to hell. Yeah,
absolutely. Yeah. And you might think, well, it'll be a fine ride on the way, and maybe it will, but that's where you're headed.
Well, I mean, I disagree with the whole concept of hell. Like, I disagree with hell existing as a real place. I disagree with heaven existing as a real place because we haven't seen any evidence that either of those things exist. So basically, they are working off of a very theistically minded position, and they're presupposing a theistic basis for their worldview. And that's why they feel like they don't have to justify heaven existing, hell existing. It doesn't matter that the concept of hell didn't exist, at least in the popular form that it exists now. Even at the very beginning of Christianity, it definitely didn't exist in Judaism. It did exist, like the burning fiery hell. It did exist in Zoroastrianism before Christianity sprang forth. All I'm trying to say is that they don't feel the need to justify that heaven and hell exists because they presuppose that they exist. They just say they exist, and that's all they need to do. And I guess if they're following along with the Platonic forms, just because they have an idea of hell, that means that hell exists.
So, no, everything has to be put in proper order. That's why Christ says that he calls upon his followers to be perfect. Why? Because everything has to be put in the proper order. Why? Because otherwise it falls into disorder.
Sure, everybody here knows very basic, laws of thermodynamics. I mean, there's disorder that's being created all the time. Like as entropy increases, disorder increases. So I'm not exactly sure what he's talking about here, which I'm sure that he'll explain here in a second. But as far as like a scientific perspective, this whole disorder thing, he's not really defining anything here. And so I really don't know how to understand what he's saying because he's being so ambiguous that you can't determine what he's saying. From a scientific perspective, disorder is being generated all the time. It's continuously growing, the amount of disorder. There's no way that we can stop the disorder from growing. Every time energy changes form from like the electromagnetic energy that's emitted by the sun, and then it gets transferred into heat, that's creating disorder right there. That's entropy, further increasing in the universe. So I don't know what he's talking about when he speaks about being perfect and Jesus talking about being perfect, which I did find in the Bible. It's Matthew 5:48, I believe, where Jesus just says, "Be perfect like God." Or some kind of shit like that. But it's amongst all of these other passages that are talking about like how you should love your neighbor. And in that respect, he's talking about being perfect. So being perfect in just loving your neighbor, loving your enemy, and all this other stuff. Like the golden rule, I guess, is really what he's trying to talk about here. More on the subject of this very Christian idea of perfection. I know it was really enforced on me as a Christian to be perfect like Jesus. Whether or not that's actually biblical, it doesn't matter. It was forced on me as a child. And that really caused a lot of psychological problems. And I think that expecting perfection out of people is something that's very emotionally and psychologically destructive. And it's very abusive to do that to your child. So I wouldn't suggest that to anybody, but I feel like it further exposes how Christianity is actually abusive. If you're going to teach Christianity in the way of demanding perfection from your child or from each other, or from yourself for that matter.
It's like, is that good? Well, if you want disorder, but what are you going to do? You're going to heap burning coals of fire on your own head? Well, you can. That's hell. Every devil shoveling the burning coal on his own head. Right.
Oh, okay. That's what he means by disorder. I don't know how that's like disorder. I mean, is that kind of a crazy thing to do? Sure. I don't know how he's defining disorder, that shoveling hot coals on your head would be considered disorder. Seems to be very subjective in nature. He has it in mind as how things should operate. And because pouring hot coals on your head is not how things should operate to him, therefore it's disordered. In hell, that would be ordered, right? Like he's trying to describe hell as being this disordered pile of shit. And part of that disorder is putting hot coals on your head. But if that is part of hell, like an integral part of being in hell, having hot coals poured on your head by yourself, then that seems to be part of the natural order of hell, does it not? So it kind of seems like he's being a bit hypocritical here.
I'm still trying to get at this. All right, so what if I just say, all right, I can't believe in some invisible sugar daddy up in the... this is not what I think. Invisible sugar daddy up in the clouds who's going to give me a theme park if I just quit masturbating, all right? I can't believe that anymore. It just seems like it's bullshit, and it's a fairy tale that people tell themselves.
Well, it is and it isn't. It's a concretized representation.
It's a concretized. Fuck you, Jordan Peterson. Concretized. I don't know how the fuck to say that word. All he means is that it's an actual definition of a god, or an actual definition of what it means to get into heaven. By the way, I don't believe in that either. Like what Matt Fradd said, I don't believe that Christianity teaches that you just need to stop masturbating in order to get a theme park in heaven. I don't think that that's what Christianity teaches about heaven. I think that Christianity teaches that in heaven, you'll just worship God all the time. And that's what heaven is. So I don't have like some kind of unreasonable expectation about heaven. I also don't have an unreasonable expectation about what Jesus, or God rather, requires of us in order to get into heaven. It's just very complicated to understand what God wants when there are so many different groups of Christians out there that have different requirements for getting into heaven. you have some Protestants out there that are just simply believing in God and Jesus, for that matter, gets you into heaven. Then you have people like Catholics, which is what Pints with Aquinas is, the denomination he's part of. Catholics think that you have to do both good works and believe in Jesus in order to get into heaven. So those that do horrible works, like all the pedophiles that exist within the Catholic Church, they're apparently going to hell, according to Catholicism. Although I'm not exactly sure how all that works with them being priests and then, having some kind of line to God or some kind of ability to get forgiveness for other people. I mean, I really don't know how all that works. I don't know if they still go to hell, but definitely regular Catholics out there will totally go to hell if you do something bad. Okay, that's what I know about Catholic. And then there are Protestant denominations that also preach about the faith and works. There are some that preach about, primarily works, and there are some that preach, like I said, only faith in Jesus. And then there are the ones that believe that once you believe in Jesus, you're always saved. So it's a once saved, always saved kind of theology. It's just very confusing in Christianity to know exactly which one is the right doctrine, because they all say that they're all the right doctrine. It's just all very confusing, because it's not just as simply, believing in Jesus and you get into heaven. You have to talk about the nuance that exists in the different denominations. The Catholics are right because they were first. That is fucking correct, honey. I agree.
But it's not without its wisdom. Like, there isn't anything more complex in the cosmos than a human psyche.
I don't know about that. Like, I feel like as far as complexity goes, I don't know how you would measure the complexity of the human psyche. And also, I don't know that there's not an organism that exists out there somewhere in the universe that has a more complex psyche. I mean, Jordan Peterson is basically espousing knowledge that he just simply cannot know. I mean, maybe he's just automatically assuming that aliens don't exist and that these aliens can't have a psyche that's more complex than ours. That would be a speculative assumption there, which degrades his hypothesis about it. If we're judging like whose hypothesis here is more correct, I would side on the idea that the human psyche is not the most complex thing. And that seems to be the most correct thing. His is bullshit.
And to think of the psyche, let's say the Father, as a representation of the highest spirit, it's not prima facie absurd.
I mean, I feel like what Jordan Peterson just said is prima facie absurd. That would be absurd on its face, or just just looking at the proposition that he just made about the Father being the highest whatever in the fuck. What he just said right there is ridiculous, because he's basically defining God in a way that obfuscates what God is, to the point where God can be anything. And in this particular aspect, God is the psyche or whatnot, like the what he said before, the deepest intuition or instinct, the deepest instinct. That's what he said. And so he's basically defining God in such an ambiguous way that God can literally be anything to anybody. But then here in a minute, he's going to invoke Yahweh, which is really kind of crazy.
It's not a bad metaphor. So I'll give you an example of that. So imagine all the admirable men you've ever known.
Doing it now.
Okay. Well, they have a unity, right? It's the unity of whatever makes them admirable.
Yeah.
Right. So they all reflect the same spirit. Seriously, they're all approximations to the same spirit. Well, what's that spirit? What's the God of Abraham?
I mean, so the God of Abraham and being an admirable person, those are antithetical to each other. God is not an admirable person. And also, what I would consider to be an admirable person is going to be different than what somebody else, especially in my area, would consider an admirable person. Basically, Jordan Peterson is saying it's all very subjective, and everybody has their own definition of God, their own idea of what God is, or their own approximations of what God is. It's just that it's still Yahweh, which then ties it back to something concrete, which is something he complained about just prior in this interview about Matt Fradd presenting some concretized version of heaven or God. And it's like, oh, well, that's just a real definition of it. Here's my bullshit definition where it can mean anything. That's not actually improving your argument there, JP.
That's what it is. This is a definition.
Yeah, all right.
Right? So God is the benevolence that shines through the good Father. It's a definition.
I feel like you don't understand Christianity if you're calling Yahweh benevolent. Yahweh is obviously not benevolent. Benevolent person, an admirable person, would not allow women to be forced into sexual slavery. He would not allow chattel slavery to exist. A benevolent or admirable person would not allow most of the things to happen in the Bible that God definitely allowed. So no, it's very obviously not the deepest spirit or the highest spirit that is Yahweh. If you were going to use that as a metaphor for God, you would have to say that everybody has their own individualized God. Everybody has their own individualized idea of God. And everything that you approximate in your head, going back to the whole Platonic forms thing, everything that is approximate to the idea of God in your head, it's all going to actually match that idea because you are the one that's creating that idea. You are the one that is defining your personal version of God. Of course, Jordan Peterson would prefer to believe in magic. So I guess, my arguments are just all shit.
Just like God is the call to adventure, or just like God is conscience. And you think, well, that's not God. It's like, well, have it your way.
That's not God. Pfft, fucking Mickey D's then. Have it your way. Isn't that it? That Mickey D's does the have it your way thing. I guess what Jordan Peterson is actually making an argument for a McDonald's version of God. Can you imagine Ronald McDonald up there acting like God and like prescribing sexual slavery for women in order to have a cheeseburger? Like that would be crazy. But sorry, my ADHD brain is like getting all off into the weeds here. What he's essentially saying is if you reject his notion, this ambiguous notion of what God is, he's just going to throw his hands up and be like, well, fine, do whatever you want then. Like a fucking child.
Like, you're playing games. You're playing games.
But surely it's not playing a game to just be curious and say, okay, maybe there is no such being as God. Maybe Jesus wasn't the second person of the Blessed Trinity. Maybe heaven is a myth. And yet these stories help me flourish for some unknown reason. And so I'm best to go along with it.
I don't know how all of this is a game. He's brought this up before in the other video over there on my channel, but I don't know how all of this is a game. Like, why does he think it's a game? I mean, we're sitting here trying to have a rational conversation with somebody that is just fucking crazy, but we're trying to actually have a philosophical discussion on why atheism is either illogical or irrational, which Jordan Peterson has actually in this interview said that atheists are not irrational. They are rational as long as, they accept the materialistic determinism sort of thing. They're rational people. We're trying to discuss how atheism is irrational or illogical, or what's the best argument for atheism, which he's already stated is materialistic determinism. So I guess he's already answered that one, but he still hasn't been able to substantiate why atheism is illogical, or in his words, an illegal chess move.
But it's hard to really get on board with something.
Well, you can't commit to that. No.
Yeah.
This is an all-in enterprise.
Okay.
It's an all-in enterprise.
I guess by all-in enterprise, he's talking about how you have to be all in with God or religion in general. Like you have to just fully commit yourself to the religion, which I'm not exactly sure what he even means by that, because he's got kind of a skewed idea of who Yahweh is, what Christianity teaches. So I don't know what it means in this respect to be all in. This is the problem with speaking ambiguously, like Jordan Peterson is known to do and has proved to do in this entire interview.
So in the story of Cain and Abel, for example, Abel offers his best and God accepts it. And Cain doesn't. Cain offers what's second best and God rejects it. And that's life. And everyone knows that. It's like life is a fatal game, and it's gonna require everything you have, and everyone knows that. It's like you can offer your second best and be accepted. No,
you underestimate my ability to be okay with not best shit, like not best work, not best solution, I'm perfectly fine with a solution that doesn't perfectly accomplish whatever task I'm supposed to do. Like, as long as my solution can actually satisfy the task in some kind of way, it doesn't really fucking matter to me if it's the best or perfect solution. As long as it completed the task that I was supposed to do. He's talking about how, you can't offer up anything that's other than perfection because it's going to get rejected. No, sir. Nobody does anything perfectly. Like, I feel like saying, this is the perfect way to do it. It's espousing information that you just simply cannot have. You don't know if that's the absolute perfect way to do something. There's no way to know that. Essentially, Jordan Peterson, like he's done so far in this video, has again espoused information that he simply cannot know. And he's doing that because God requires perfection, right? In the Gospels and in the Bible in general, God requires you to be perfect. Otherwise, you're going to get punished by God, right? By being sent to hell, as far as Christians go. And in the Old Testament, it's God just unleashing his wrath on you like a drunken ex-husband or something. But it's fairly obvious that Jordan Peterson does not know what in the fuck he's talking about.
First of all, you won't even accept yourself under those circumstances because you'll take no pride in not pride, wrong word. You'll take no solace in your accomplishments if they're of second-rate quality.
Yeah.
You are underestimating my ability to not give a fuck about having the most perfect solution or producing the most perfect thing. I just simply don't give a fuck about doing that. I'm not going to stress myself out about that. And I don't think that anybody else should stress themselves out about producing perfect shit either. That seems totally ridiculous. Again, it was something that was pushed on me as a Christian, as a child, to be perfect, to be this perfect representation. And they always had Jesus as the model, like, be like Jesus, be perfect like Jesus. So if you don't do things as perfectly as Jesus does, then you're obviously a piece of shit worthy of burning in hell. And I feel like that's emotionally abusive. But again, don't underestimate me there, JP.
Right? You can't
If
fool
you could
yourself.
have done better, yeah.
That's for sure. And the times when you're somewhat satisfied with your miserable existence, well, that's when you know you've put something on the line. Right? And that's what you're called to do by your wife and by your children and by your community, by your conscience. Well, that's all a reflection of something real. And you might say, well, not transcendentally real. It's like, well, why not? Okay. Why not transcendentally real?
Yeah.
Well, why not transcendentally real? Well, I would feel like the fact that there aren't things in general that are transcendental, like they don't transcend time and space, and especially the behaviors that he's talking about here, these intuitions and everything like that, because obviously everybody's got different intuitions. What he's saying is that there's this intuition of producing the best shit and only being satisfied with yourself when you do it in the best way. But that's still like subjective. It's subjectively you thinking that you've done it in the best way. Does that mean that it actually is the best way? No. And all of this is very much based in time and space and the culture that you live in and all this other shit. Like it is based in all of these things that are not transcendental. So why not transcendental? Because there's nothing that indicates that it is.
Do you think we're made in opposition to the spirit of the natural order?
I have the same face as Matt Fradd, right? Very confused, visibly confused. I'm not exactly sure what he's talking about with this, being made to go against the spirit of whatever in the hell. I feel like he's just pulling out words now because he's very ambiguous when he speaks in general. But at this point, I think that he's trying to suggest that the reason why humans are made to quote unquote seek perfection is because there's some kind of spirit that is making us be that way. And unless there's a spirit to make us be that way, how else are you going to explain it? And he's basically about to shit on naturalism.
Is that your theory? Or we're random? Really? Random. That's your theory, is it? That's not a very smart theory.
I don't know what he means by randomness as being a theory. Like, are we randomly evolved into needing this perfection, which I don't think that we actually do need it, but are we evolved to do it in that way, in a random way? Or does he mean that we've randomly assembled our atoms in order to be this way? I would say that he's got a skewed idea of what random means, if those are the things that he's talking about. Again, he's ambiguous, so it's tough to tell. But if he is talking about that kind of randomness, it's more, pseudo randomness. Like there are reasons for why certain things happen. And like the reason for humans developing is not random in that it just sort of haphazardly happened. That's not the randomness that we're talking about. The randomness is in how genetic mutations happen and all this other stuff. Like there are portions of things that are random, but like in order to explain how humans developed, you have to follow a causal chain of events into the past in order to explain our evolution, which therefore makes it not random. It's just a consequence of the interactions of the natural world. So that's not random, but there are portions of the natural world that do seem random.
Okay.
There's nothing random. There's some random mutation, and even that's not true. There's a hierarchy of mutational repair.
No.
Yeah, well, this has been discovered quite recently.
So this is not exactly true. As far as, I don't know about hierarchies of mutational repair. There are different types of mutational repair, but I don't know of any hierarchies of mutational. There are different repair mechanisms that seem to have a priority, but there's no other priority other than the mechanisms that repair DNA. And that's repairing damaged DNA. It's not repairing the mutations that don't actually damage like the DNA. And like damaging the DNA would be like malformed pairs of DNA chemicals and everything like that, like pairs that are not syncing up and whatnot. There are repair mechanisms in our DNA that will fix those things. There's no hierarchy of it in the way that he's about to explain.
Mutation is random. No, turns out that's not true, because mutations that occur to genes that are crucial for survival are repaired with 100% accuracy.
That's not true. The repair mechanisms that DNA employs in order to repair damaged parts of DNA are not 100% effective. There are error-prone repair mechanisms, there are replication errors, there's environmental damage, and of course, aging and disease. The error-prone repair mechanisms can actually introduce more mutations as they repair the DNA. The way that DNA replicates itself is also not 100% accurate in that it can also produce mutations, which just means that it's not a perfect copy. It has a few spots in there where the DNA doesn't appear on the face of it to be damaged. It's just mutated in that it has different chemicals that are making it up. And also DNA can be damaged by UV light. The repair mechanisms that we've been discussing can fix those damaged portions of DNA, but again, not perfectly. Oh, and also another thing that I wanted to cover real quick is the fact that mutations that occur, like from UV light damage or radiation or any other kind of environmental or like copy errors and everything like that, they are random. Like it's not organized in the way that he's talking about. As far as like DNA repair and all this other stuff, or even where mutations actually occur in the genome. So it's not like the repair mechanisms for the survival specific genes are better from anywhere else where they repair DNA. The repair mechanisms are the repair mechanisms, and it can't actually determine which parts of the DNA are needed for survival and which parts are not. If you wanted to go the route and interpret what he said as being that all or most of the DNA is needed for survival, so therefore he's saying that the repair processes that exist are 100% perfect, he would still be wrong. And just a little bit of a history lesson here. We actually discovered DNA repair mechanisms in the 1940s and 50s. So DNA repair from these mutations, whether it's, the damaged DNA or if it's actual just regular mutations. Those were actually discovered back in the 1940s. But one thing important for this section is that they are not 100% accurate.
There's some room for experimentation out in the margins, but not at the center, just like in life itself. It's like, and whatever shaped us isn't random. The mutation process part of it is random.
Oh, okay. So the mutation process, like the process of it happening, like that. So exactly opposite of what you just said, that part is random. Okay, so when we talk about random mutations, what's your beef? Like, I have no idea what his issue is with saying random mutations. If he's just going to say, oh yeah, they're random, but 100% repair.
And I suppose we capitalize on chance, but as an explanation for the nature of being itself, it's like no one knows how life arose. No one knows anything about consciousness.
Okay, so there's a lot to unpack there. As far as chance goes, it's not chance that, we kind of came about, right? Like, it is chance or randomness in how things evolved and how things progressed, but it's not random which genes allowed us to survive better in our environment. It's not random which genes proved to be advantageous for us to procreate. Those are the non-random portions of the evolutionary process that explains how we got here. And as far as abiogenesis goes, or how life began, while we don't know all of the steps that go into it, we have enough knowledge to know that magic isn't required. And then there's consciousness. While we can't fully explain consciousness, everything that we've discovered so far seems to lead us in the direction of consciousness being an emergent property of complex central nervous systems. So I don't know what he's talking about here when he says that these things need magic in order to operate, which I think is the thing that he's implying here.
Yeah.
Not the least. It's a byproduct of neural activity. It's why isn't your solar plexus conscious then?
Yeah.
Well, that's because your solar plexus operates differently than your central nervous system, like your brain and everything. Like, I mean, it's part of your nervous system, but as far as like your brain and the different parts of your brain that interact in order to produce a consciousness, they just act differently. Like, they're not meant to interact with each other like that. The solar plexus is a collection of nerves and everything that controls like your midsection, like liver and stomach and all that other kind of stuff. It's part of your autonomic nervous system. And those are things that just operate. Like, your brain sends out the signals in order for those things to operate, but you don't consciously have to make those decisions. So I just feel like maybe Jordan Peterson doesn't understand how the brain works, which is kind of funny if you know anything about Jordan Peterson.
Right? You've got neurons galore. There's more neurons in your autonomic nervous system than there are in your central nervous system. It's not conscious.
Right. They're not conscious, but that's because those particular nerves, those cells and everything, they operate and interact differently than the ones that are interacting in your brain in order to produce consciousness. It's not the mere fact that they are neurons or nerves. It's the pure fact that they interact in a specific way that produces consciousness. That is the nuance that he's not seeing. He's just like an infantile child who hears, oh, your brain's made up of nerves and neurons and everything like that, and that's where your consciousness resides. He's like, oh, well, why doesn't my back have a fucking brain of its own or a consciousness of its own? He just turns into the child shitting on the floor in the supermarket and then, doing that thing where they twirl around in a circle, screaming their brains out. I feel like that's Jordan Peterson at this moment.
It's not neural activity per se. And most neural activity in your cerebral cortex isn't conscious. What the hell is consciousness? It's the spirit of God that what would you say, broods upon the
face of the waters.
That's
baby.
right. That's what consciousness is.
Yeah.
That's as good a definition as any. In fact, it's the best definition I've ever seen.
So basically what Jordan Peterson finished up there with is this whole idea that consciousness is magical and requires a God in order to operate. But more than that, your consciousness is a reflection of God himself, which he has no basis for whatsoever. He doesn't have any evidence that actually substantiates this. He just makes the speculative claim that that is how things are. And I would need to see evidence that connects my consciousness to God. Right now, it seems like the most non-speculative answer is that our consciousness is a product, an emergent property of a complex central nervous system. I would need to see evidence to the contrary in order to get me to believe something completely different. But we all know how JP would react to being asked for evidence. He would just be like, why are you asking me evidence? And then he'd probably go off on some kind of rant that you can't really discern unless you had a dictionary with you. And even then, that's only going to help you know what the words mean that he says, but not how they actually interact with each other. It's so frustrating. But anyways, that's going to be it for JP. I am feeling very underwhelmed at this point with Jordan Peterson. I don't really respond to Jordan Peterson all that often, but it kind of seems like he obfuscated God down to this very ambiguous form where God could literally be anything. And in fact, you have God living inside your head. And this God is an individualized God, but also at the same time, he's Yahweh, which is a very standardized God. It makes no sense. It seems like it's very hypocritical when he lays all of this out. But ultimately, everything revolves around this speculative claim that magic must exist. And Jordan Peterson seems to reject the notion that magic doesn't exist. And he prefers to see the world through a lens that includes magic. And that's where he disagrees with atheists. And he even says that atheists that adhere to a materialistic and deterministic view of reality, they're not irrational. So it seems like I'm not being irrational. He feels like he's not being irrational, but my God, is he being irrational. Anyways, if you want to see the other half of this video, it's over there on my channel, Godless Engineer. So it should be linked down in the description below if you would like to go and watch it. You can get caught up on some more of the philosophical bullshit that Jordan Peterson was spinning. If you will, here, why don't you go down below and let me know what you thought in the comments section. Can you actually discern what Jordan Peterson was trying to espouse here? Did I get a lot of things wrong with interpreting Jordan Peterson and what he was saying? Let me know down below in the comments. And while you're down there, why don't you smash that like button and subscribe to Rhino, who will be back soon. And as always, don't forget to stand up and use your voice. Bye, heathens.